Hello, am I audible?
I hear you.
Sarchita ma'am has joined us, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, Harshita, you are audible.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Harshita Joshi. It's my great pleasure that all of you have joined our session on right to education and its implementation. With sincere efforts by Rahul Mishra and Abhishek Tiwari, founder of PBA, we are fortunate enough to have Mrs. Megan Tucker, founder of Charity United, with us. Pro Bono Foundation have always worked towards the betterment of people who need social legal help. We have organized many webinars with great personalities, politicians, and advocates. Pro Bono Foundation has extended their helping hands over 8,000 migrant workers to reach their native places with all the necessities. Pro Bono Foundation has also come up with an initiative of opening a library in the district of Mirzapur for free of cost for the aspiring students. Anyone whosoever wants to help might send up the books from the wish list. Great opportunities to help others seldom come, but small ones surround us every day. So a little gesture from your side would be of great help. Megan Tucker ma'am is the founder of the Charity United, a US public charity that has brought humanitarian aid and education to over 1 lakh people in 5 countries and has helped thousands of underprivileged children around the world to receive better access to education. Charity United is currently working with local charity organizations in India to bring education to children in slums of India, working towards the goal of ensuring that all children of the world, regardless of circumstances, can have access to an education. Mrs. Tucker has over 30 years of experience in the field of child counseling, education, and child care. She has lectured in the top boarding schools and universities and has done hands-on work running relief and educational programs in all corners of the globe, tutoring both adults and children of all ages. Ma'am has worked for one of the top boarding schools in US and has done an international school in Europe and has tutored and mentored in English as a second language to the executive directors and top executive directors of international organizations. Her passion, however, has always been helping children. Ma'am is the author of a new series of educational books for children and students of English as a second language, as important basics are often skipped in early years of the study, which leads to difficulties later on and in life. Megan's one book fill in those missing basics so that all the students can succeed. One last thing. Meanwhile, if you have any query, please shoot it in the chat box. We'll take it in the last. Over to you, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am, you are not audible to us.
Sorry. Am I there now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Now you're
okay,
audible.
Wonderful.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry about that.
Yes.
Thank you very much for having me here to this webinar, for the invitation, and thank you everyone for coming to hear what I have to say on this subject. It's a subject that is very important to me, so I am more than happy to discuss this subject today. I want to start out with a little bit of an introduction on my relationship with the rights of a child to education and how I come to be in the position of spending a lot of time and energy on this subject. Charity United was originally formed during not during the refugee crisis, because the refugee crisis is ongoing, but during the time period in Eastern Europe when a large number of Middle Eastern refugees were traveling through the Balkans into Europe in very poor conditions. And I found myself in a position where many thousands of children were going to be in danger of freezing to death if I didn't do something about the situation. So I decided to do something about the situation, and that's how I came into that position. It wasn't something that I necessarily planned long in advance, but the first project that we did was on the border of Serbia and Macedonia, and several thousand refugees came through every night, and there were many, many children, maybe 25%, maybe 40% children, and these children lacked food and especially clothing to travel, often on foot and with outdoors, sleeping outdoors, a lot of time outdoors for many months through Eastern Europe and other areas in below freezing temperatures. And this is in addition to often having fallen into the sea or nearly drowned just a few days before when crossing from Turkey into Greece through the Aegean Sea. And it was often in addition to having gone through unspeakable hardships, traveling from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria through Turkey, through Greece, and up to Macedonia where I was. So every day I was faced with children that were in a very bad state physically and emotionally. And I was putting clothing on children every day, and I was desperately working night and day to raise the funds to purchase that clothing, socks, shoes, coats, hats, scarves, jackets, everything. We were also helping the parents, of course, and the elderly and the sick people. But, of course, we always focus on children, largely. Now, humanitarian aid on an emergency basis is something that can never be forgotten or dropped, because a freezing child is a freezing child, a hungry child is a hungry child. And there were other situations even worse than that due to the criminality involved in human smuggling. And there was torture and abuse that would occur. So there were drownings and so on. So it's always vital to have an emergency solution there whenever possible to handle these emergency situations. But I didn't want to be a charity that only does what they say. They say chasing the tiger by the tail. In other words, another bowl of soup, another pair of socks, but it's an endless cycle of another tragedy, another refugee, another refugee. I wanted to also put something in place that would help to create a better future for the next generation and the next generation after that. So I looked this over. What can I do for children beyond immediate aid that will actually help to ensure that they can have a chance for a better future, so that this type of thing is less likely to happen to the next generation of children, to their children? Yes, it's true that these people were victims of wars and tragedy and political situations, but it's also true that a nation is built up of people. And when a nation is built up of more highly educated people, everything else just goes better. And I don't think there's many people in the world that would disagree with that. So education is a primary building block to a prosperous and happy society. If you go into a prison and you interview the inmates of the prison, or if you go out on the streets and you interview the criminal gangs, the people that are living off of stealing wallets and so on, I doubt you will find many people with university degrees in the arts and medicine and so on. You will find a huge lack of education. So this is the starting point to what can later become crime, can become conflict between people, can become war, can become economic difficulties, tragedy, and so on. So I feel that putting an education there for children, for the future generation, is extremely vital if we want to even hope for making some change today that will result in fewer tragedies 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, because everything we do has a long-term effect that we can't always measure. So in regards to the human rights of a child, I decided, okay, one of the primary purposes of my charity will be to make the human rights of a child a reality. Now, that includes the right to food and clothing and shelter, as is covered in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. But it also includes this very important factor of education. So there are a couple of things I'll go over here. The Convention on the Rights of a Child, adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1989. Articles 28 and 29 of that convention cover the rights of a child to education. And I won't go into this in every little detail, but Article 28.1 talks about the right of a child to education in general, and then point A speaks about making primary education compulsory and available free to all. That's very important because education starts at the primary levels at the very, very young ages, age 3, age 5, and so on. And if that is not available to a child, then his entire future can be corrupted, can be more difficult. He will not do well in his later schooling, and he will not do well in his schooling after that and after that. And it can be very difficult to educate a child that has missed these early basic stages, unless those basics are covered later. If the basics are covered later, then you will have a delayed education. But if the basics are never covered, you will basically have a missing education. And I want to go over this again because I think it's a very important point, and I want to make sure I don't say it too fast, that it really that this comes across. An individual who does not get the basics, the basic fundamental, most important starting parts of an education, if that individual is then 3 years later put into school at a higher level, he will not understand that higher level. So to take an example, if a child has never learned how to understand ABC or how to read letters, you cannot put him into a chemistry class at the age of 15 and give him a book and tell him to study it and then expect him to understand chemistry. If the child does not receive that education at the age that he should, let's say at the age of 4, he should have been learning how to read letters. I say ABC because that's my language, but whatever the language is, let's say he doesn't have that opportunity and he doesn't start until age 6. Well, if he still learns to read those letters and pronounce those letters and understand those letters, he will only be 2 years delayed in his education. But if he is just put into the training and the education that he would have been in if he had had his earlier education, if he's put in with all the other 6-year-olds who already know the letters, he's not going to learn. He's not going to get that same education. He's not only going to be delayed by 2 years, he's going to be delayed for the rest of his education. So he could wind up being delayed by 10 years, by 15 years. So these basic important original points of an education cannot be dropped. If they are delayed, they're delayed, but they cannot be skipped. Now, I will take an example of something I run into very often, which is the meanings of small words. And these are the words like are, at, and, the, a, as, etc. Every language has small words. Those are the English ones. And I have tutored many adults age 30, 40, 50 years old who don't understand the meanings of these words. And this has actually slowed their education down considerably. And the time to learn those words is now. Even if you should have learned them 50 years ago, the time to understand those words is now. Because it's often assumed that we know what those words mean, but we actually don't. We have spoken to university professors, to people very high in the government, to people with all kinds of degrees, and we ask them the definition of the word too, and they cannot define it. When people don't understand these small words, it actually becomes a major barrier to their overall understanding of entire subjects, even if they can use the words, even if they think they know what the words mean. A good time for a child or a student to be learning those words is actually at a very young age. And it would vary depending on if the student is English as a first language or second language. But a good time to learn is as soon as possible, not at the age of 50. So this is one example of a key basic. I just see a comment here. What problem have you seen in the Indian education system, and according to you, what needs to be changed? It's a very good question, and it's definitely part of what I'm talking about right now. I would say that this missing basics is very, very important, and this is what we have observed, my husband and I. My husband is currently operating the slum education project in New Delhi and is educating the children in the slums in and around New Delhi. And we're putting in these missing basics. We've also lectured in some of the top private schools and universities around India. And what we have encountered is a situation of children not learning the basics and then being put into a higher level. For example, a child who doesn't know how to say, "How are you?" in English. And at the age of 15, he's sent to study chemistry in English. That doesn't work. Just because, he should be able to study chemistry in English at the age of 15 does not mean that you can just put him into that without first making sure he understands English, or let him study chemistry in Hindi, for example. But these are missing basics. If a child does not understand how to say hat, what's an apple, how to ask for a cup of coffee, not coffee, that's an adult thing, but how to ask for a glass of milk, you cannot have that child study chemistry in English. And this seems like an obvious point, but apparently this is not as understood as it should be. Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening. So I think that this point of missing basics is very, very key. And I'll go over that a little bit later. I'm going to continue going through the articles here. Article 28 point E. I'm sorry, no, that's not the one. Point 2, parties shall take all appropriate measures to ensure that school discipline is administered in a manner consistent with the child's human dignity. All right, this is very important. It's not good manners to a child to teach him in such a way that is impossible for him to succeed. That sounds obvious, but I think it's also something important to keep in mind. So again, you go back to this missing basics. If a child hasn't learned how to pronounce ABC, and then you show him the word cat and you say, "What does that mean?" Of course, he's not going to know what the word cat means. If I showed you, if you didn't speak Russian and you didn't know how to read Cyrillic, and I showed you some Cyrillic text in Russian, I wouldn't expect you to know that that means cat either. So to teach a child in consistency with his dignity, you would need to ensure that he has step A before you try to push him to step B. You would have to ensure that he can speak English well enough before he's made to study chemistry in English, that he understands basic words before you ask him to read entire books. Another point is, regardless of whatever lockdown is occurring and virus and various ramifications and politics and so on, children learn with one-on-one attention and face-to-face. And they actually need that. They need somebody who's there with them, who will listen to them, to their troubles, who will watch their eyes, who will actually speak to them directly. And this is in a manner consistent with a child's human dignity. I recognize that there are problems in relation to coronavirus and so on and so forth. But it is something to be confronted and looked at, that children need human contact. And I'm sure anyone who knows a child who has worked with children has experienced this. If I go back to example in a refugee camp in Northern Macedonia in the dead of winter, we would have children arrive to us freezing, wet, shivering, crying. And it wasn't like, oh, let's just grab this child and throw some clothes on him. We saw people who did that, who would just grab the child and throw clothes on him. That doesn't work. You need to communicate to the child. You need to say hello. You need to look him in the eyes and say, what's your name? My name's Megan. Nice to meet you. Try to speak his language if you can. Even if you do it terribly, it's better than nothing. And do you need a hat? Are you cold? Okay, good. I'm going to give you some mittens here. I'm going to give you a hat. Let's warm up your hands. And that human interaction will cheer them up a million more times than the new jacket or the new hat. It is extremely important to show a child that he's important and loved and respected and that he matters, and to have that personal one-on-one communication with the child. Okay, next point. Point 3 here talks about international cooperation in matters relating to education, in particular with a view to contributing to the elimination of ignorance and illiteracy throughout the world. And then it also mentions, in this regard, particular account should be taken of the needs of developing countries. So, okay, illiteracy. It sounds obvious that an illiterate person cannot study successfully in a university, but it often needs to be said. Literacy begins with knowing how to read. Knowing how to read begins with being able to read letters and words and knowing what those words mean. And when this point is skipped, we do not have literacy, and the rest is never going to happen. If you had a 18-year-old child, or not child, an 18-year-old adult or a 15-year-old teenager who could not read, your next step would not be to put him into high school or university classes. Your next step would be to teach him to read, regardless of his age. And maybe his education would be delayed, but he would at least get an education. You cannot teach a person who cannot read. This sounds obvious, but it actually needs to be said because this is violated at times. All right, Article 29, 1A. The development of the child's personality, talents, and mental and physical abilities to their fullest potential. Once again, when a child fully understands the meanings of words and small words and basics, then he will be able to study and become educated and gather skills up to the point of his full potential without being held back by missing building blocks. This is just the classic example of if you build a house without first building a foundation, the house is going to fall down. First you build the foundation, then you build the house. You wouldn't say, well, the foundation was supposed to be built in March and the house was supposed to be built in June, but they didn't build the foundation in March because it was raining. And now it's June, so we're going to build a house because it's time to build the house now. You wouldn't do that because a house would fall down without a foundation. You would say, we're behind schedule. We need to build the foundation first, and then we build the house. The same goes with the child's education. If the child missed the education that he should have had at age 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and you put him into a class for age 12, he's going to fail. Just like that house is going to fall down without a foundation. You need to put that foundation there, or you're setting him up for a lifetime of failure. Just checking if there's a question here. No, okay. All right, point B, development of respect for human rights. Once again, this is about human rights of a child to education and a real education. Point C, respect for the child's parents. Okay, obviously it's very important to respect a child's parents, a parent's wishes, and to work with the parents. A parent has a native desire for the well-being of his child, and no government or law or exterior person can replace that. So I would strongly advise against any laws that ever take the rights of a parent away from ensuring what's best for his child, because it's the parent that is going to have the strongest drive to ensure the best for the child. Obviously, there are a few exceptions, and here and there are abusive parents, but for the most part, we've heard the stories of the mother who will lift a huge truck with her own hands, a tiny woman, to lift it off a baby. Mothers and parents have a very strong drive for what is best for their child, and no law can replace that. In the United States, we've had problems with children being given very harmful drugs, and the parents' rights to prevent these drugs from being administered being inhibited by governments. And this is quite a tragedy. And I know there are many groups in America that fight back against this type of abuse, because the mother can see the child. The mother can see that if her 15-year-old daughter starts to take a pill and then starts to cry every night and becomes suicidal, she knows something's wrong, and she has the right to say, no, I'm not letting my daughter take that pill. The pharmaceutical company that's making money off of that pill isn't going to make that decision properly. The mother's going to make that decision properly. So this applies to all aspects of education, including instances where drugging or medicines are interjected into schooling systems. The development of respect for the child's parents is extremely important here. I'm just checking the chat box here. If there's a question. No. Okay, good. I see things written, but they're not questions. All right, next. Point D, the preparation of the child for responsible life. Once again, when a child is educated properly, he doesn't only get a degree. He also is able to apply what he learned in life and do things well. If you teach a person how to cook breakfast, then in the end result will be that this person can produce a good breakfast that will be nutritious and that people will like to eat, and they will feel good after they eat it, and they won't be hungry till lunchtime. A certificate that says this person is a professional breakfast cooker does not replace the actual ability to cook breakfast. The primary purpose of education should be to ensure the person can do what he has learned, not just that he gets a piece of paper saying that he can. This applies to the arts, it applies to the humanities, it applies to the field of medicine, to law, to any field. It's important that education actually gives one an ability to do something and not just a piece of paper that says he can do that thing. All right. I have a question here. How does right to education promote child-friendly school? Is that what that question is? This is a RTE. I'm assuming you mean right to education. Child-friendly school. Well, a child-unfriendly school would be, I suppose, a school that a child would not want to go to, and would be a miserable experience for a child. So obviously that would be a stop and a distraction from his education. A child should actually enjoy going to school. A child should look forward to learning new things. He should be thinking about what he's going to do when he grows up and how his studies are going to help him do that thing. He should be thinking with goals and dreams for his future and studying so that he will be able to achieve those goals. If school is something that he is afraid of, that he does not look forward to, that he doesn't want to go to, that he doesn't want to do, that will hold him back in actually learning. Next question. Yes, I do feel that human rights education is extremely important, not just on the point of the right to education, but human rights in general. Reading this. Okay, I'll get to that next question after. Okay, I will give you an example. I have known policemen, different types of policemen, and Albanian policemen, Greek policemen, Macedonian policemen, for example. And sometimes these policemen would be given the job to guard a refugee camp or something. Now, some of these police who were educated as children in human rights would treat these refugees with respect. Obviously, there would be discipline. They wouldn't necessarily let them do illegal things, or they would stop them from fighting with each other if they were, but they would treat them with respect and dignity. They would try to help them when they could, and they would help the people that were helping them, and they would be kind to them. And I have known other policemen that were not taught these things. And their viewpoint on how to get a group of Syrian refugees to form a line to wait for a train would be to take out a stick and start beating them. When another person in the same area would handle this just by getting a translator and standing up on a chair with the translator and making an announcement and having it translated into Arabic and Farsi and Pashto, etc. Telling them that they need to form a line and how to form the line to wait for the train. This sounds very obvious and silly, but it's very common. And you have children, old women, handicapped people being harmed, being beaten with a stick just because this policeman did not learn human rights from a young age. I have known of situations where babies have been starved in refugee detention centers because the policeman would not allow the volunteers outside the gates to give food to the refugee children, and the prison itself was not providing it. And we had a 6-month-old baby being starved to death inside a Greek detention center because, we have orders that no outside food can come in, but they don't have any inside food either, except like this much baby formula once a day, right? Okay, this was a person who did not learn human rights in school. This is a person who does not understand that human rights are paramount, are superior to all other things, are more important than, we have a rule about no outside food comes in. Those are 2 examples, but I think you would find millions and billions of examples of this around the world where human rights violations occur. It is usually the case that these, if not always, that the people committing those human rights violations did not learn human rights in school. You want women to be respected. You want equality. You want children not to be abused. You want people not to be tortured. You want to reduce war, criminality, teach people human rights as part of their school, as part of their education in school. And if this were done in every school around the world today, I can guarantee you that our next generation would have a much, much better, easy time of it around the world. I'm checking the next question here. Okay, in regards to people being segregated into different classes and so on, I'm sure there's a lot that could be said about this. There's history on this, and things have changed a lot over the centuries. But honestly, this kind of thing exists all over the world, even if we don't call it that. In America, we have the rich, the poor, the middle class, the upper middle class, the lower middle class. I would say that it violates human rights to say that anyone is born into less privilege or less rights than any other human being. Whether that's because of a class in a society or what family they were born into or the color of their hair or the color of their skin or the fact that their grandmother was this or their grandfather was that. We are all born free and equal. This is one of our basic human rights. When we're born, we're all equal. Okay, maybe we don't all get equal opportunities, but that doesn't mean we don't deserve it. There's no reason, in my viewpoint, to treat one child as less deserving of education than another. Now, if a girl is born and she grows up to be a woman and she decides that she wants to play the role of being the wife and the mother and taking care of the home and raising the children, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful thing to do. It's a beautiful life, and many women love to do that. It's been traditional for many, many, many centuries, millennia, etc. But it's a choice, or it should be a choice. To enforce it is a different matter. Now, I'm a woman, and I have a little bit of a different way of doing things. I don't I don't stay at home and take care of a family and so on. I help children around the world. But it's still very much for me a part of my role as a woman to take care of people, to take care of children. And I like that. Women often like to play that role, to be caregivers, to help others. But what if a woman wants to grow up and become a business executive in a large company and make lots of money and buy boats? Okay, so that's what she wants to do. People should have the right to choose. That's my opinion. And next. Okay, I'm going to have to skip this next question because I think it's a little bit too far off the subject, and I don't think I have enough time to cover politics. And plus politics, I want to stay a little bit out of straight politics in terms of citizenship and so on, because there are too many details and aspects of that to give a quick answer. I would just say that in any political situation or conundrum or problem, I would recommend looking at all of the data concerned and reviewing the human rights and seeing, okay, in this circumstance, how do human rights apply? People have a right to seek a safe place to live, but how would that apply to this situation? But what the exact circumstances of that situation are can often be debated by different parties, and what body of data you have might make an influence on your decision. So I would just say, when you make a decision or a judgment politically, I would say, try to look at the various human rights, the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, and look at the decision from that viewpoint. Which decision gives the best possible scenario for human rights for all concerned and not just one side? All right. Okay, once again on Yemen, I'm going to stay a little bit away from specific individual political situations because this can just get into too many details. So I would say the same answer as I said on the last one on that. All right, I'm going to go back to the right to education here. Article 26.1, everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. This is from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26. So again, it repeats what we've been going over. All right, and now I just went over a few key points of these documents. I didn't go into everything in detail, but some of the things that I think are more important for this discussion. All right, now there are approximately 1 billion people in the world living in slums, and most of these people are children. This is around the world. So I think that when we're looking at the right to education, we should keep in mind that this is the right to education for all children. And a child that's born into a wealthy family who can be sent off to a private school is in a much different circumstance than a child that is born into a slum or similar situation where education may not be necessarily just something that they could take for granted. And a child born in an underprivileged situation is no less deserving, bright, intelligent, or beautiful than a child born of wealthy parents. So it is one of our missions to level that playing field, as they say, to try to provide as much opportunity for education for all children of the world equally as possible. An education for a child is the route out of a slum life situation, and it opens the door for future. And of course, governments around the world make every effort to provide this, but it's not enough to rely on them. We need people, we need groups, we need individuals who can step up and say, okay, what can I do to do my part to ensure that children around the world are taken care of and can receive the education? So I'm just going to go over a little bit what we are doing in terms of our own program right now on Charity United, just as an example. and then we can go into other questions and so on. I just see a little comment here. We totally agree. The uneducation is a threat to the world peace. Thank you so much. Okay, yes, thank you. Yes, it is. So right now we are in the process of piloting, testing out a program for educating children in slum situations. And we're doing this in the slums around New Delhi for now as we streamline the entire process and get it ready to be exported into areas all around India and in other parts of the world. We also have a similar project going in Venezuela, and we have projects in preparation stages in Eastern Europe and Africa along those lines. But okay, and there are other areas as well, but those are the main areas of focus right now. Now, when we go into a slum, we really focus on ensuring that the education is not just for show, that it actually is going to be something that can be implemented easily, that can be implemented by the people that are already there, by the mothers, parents, teachers, tutors that are already there on the ground, that we can train them in how to implement this program rapidly, that they can implement it easily, that it's not too expensive. Obviously, some books and materials are needed, but we try to make it as cost effective as possible. And this consists of several phases. In an area like India, where children are learning English, but it's not necessarily their first language, we have phase 1 consists of spoken English, teaches the child or student to speak. Phase 2 consists of learning the alphabet and learning to read. Phase 3 consists of learning to write, and phase 4 consists of learning grammar. Each of these are broken down into several different steps. To go over a few examples, we try to follow the natural sequence that any child would learn, of the way that a newborn baby growing up in a family would learn the language spoken by that family over his first few years of life. When a child is 6 months old, 1 year old, and he learns his first words, he's not being taught how to write. He's not being taught grammar. He's listening to the conversations around him. His mother says, maybe she points at the wall and she says, wall. She says, maybe she points at the bottle and she says, here's your bottle. He will listen and he will observe and he will start to learn words this way. A child is not taught grammar rules as his first introduction to learning how to learn a language. And it also doesn't work when you teach an older child English as a second language, or you teach any adult a language as a second language. I know because I've studied at least 10 languages. It doesn't work to start with grammar. You start with words. So we focus a lot on building up a vocabulary, and this is done in different ways. One of the ways is by pointing to things. For example, you point to the ceiling and you say, where is the ceiling? The child has to point to the ceiling. Or if you're outside, maybe you point to the tree, and you say, there's the tree. And then later you say, where is the tree? And the child has to point to the tree. Or maybe there's a table. You go, good, touch the table. So the child is learning in the environment around him the words, and he is interacting with these objects and learning these words. I'm not giving you the exact procedure, just an overall idea. Another way of handling learning words for things that are not in the environment is with flashcards, which is a little card with a picture and the word. And maybe you hold up a picture of a hat and it says hat, but mainly it's a picture of the word hat, and you say hat and the child says hat. And then you can practice with bringing up these flashcards, teaching the word hat. I'm checking the question here. What you think is major changes in education system after? I actually don't know what's going to happen, but I can tell you that what I think is very important is that children don't lose their right to education as a result of the COVID situation. And this, I don't mean necessarily that people would say that they've lost their right to education, but I think it's very important that we don't use as an excuse to take away the ability of children to receive that education. That we ensure that children still have the one-on-one attention that they need, that they still have access to materials, that they they still have teachers that will work with them. And I recognize that it's a problem, but I think it's important to realize that it's a problem and it's not something that can be ignored. I don't know what's going to happen. I just know what I want to happen, which is that all children receive a proper education no matter what, and that we don't allow something such as the COVID situation to stop that. All right, I'm just watching for any questions. I'll go over a few more things. So another thing we do to teach basic words is mimicry. That's when you do something and then the child copies it. So you could say wave, wave, and you show waving, and the child also waves and he says wave, right? You can do that with different action words. Then in regards to the small common words like at and the, of, to, as, etc. These small words, when the child gets to the point of forming sentences, it's important that he understands those from the beginning. That's not later, that's in the beginning. Which is why I'm personally in the process of writing a series of books for children and English as a second language student. And each of these books teaches one definition of one small common word, using pictures that show the meaning and at least 20 sentences for each definition, not each word, each definition, that show how this word is used. And then the child has to make his own sentences. Now, we have been using these books with 15-year-old students in India who are trying to study in English. And it takes these 15-year-old students maybe 3 times through one book just to be able to make their own sentences with that word. And what that tells us is that this step is extremely vital and is completely missing. But it absolutely must be done. I will just send you a link here quickly in the comment section so you can see the books if you're interested. This is the Learning Small Words series, and the first 7 of them are printed, but there will probably be a couple hundred of these books. But as you see there, we have, for the word and, we have 3 books. And for the word at, we have 4 books, just to teach the key, most important definitions of those words. Soon we'll be releasing others of the, a, to, etc. But these books go through with pictures and example sentences, the definitions of each of these words until they can fully use the words and understand them. So these are examples of what we are doing to put education in the slums, but making sure we start with the key basics for those children. But those basics are also needed by other children. We've lectured in private schools as well, top boarding schools, and we found the children don't understand these words, even though their parents are spending large amounts of money to send them to the best schools available for years and years and years, but they haven't learned these key basics, and then they have difficulties later on. So when it comes time for them to get their university degree, graduate, try to become successful, etc., they're often held back by not having learned these things. And another important thing to understand is that when children don't understand the words they're reading, they tend to feel separate from their studies. Their studies are something else. They're not something that is really part of them or that they're together with. They are something else. They're separate. And they don't like what they're studying as much. And when they don't like what they're studying as much, they do bad things. Maybe they go and play with their friends instead of going to school, or if they're a teenager, they stay up and they drink alcohol, and then they are not feeling good the next day. And as they do these bad things, they become even more separated from their studies, and they can get into criminality, fighting, drugs, alcohol. All of these different problems that come with the teenage years are actually just the result of an accumulation of misunderstandings for their first 10, 15 years in school, or first 10 or 15 years in their life, and maybe the first 5 to 10 years in their major schooling. So so many of the problems that people seek to resolve later in life and that people incorrectly use drugs for, medical drugs and so on, are really just a result of children not understanding meanings of words in the materials that they're studying. Reading a question here. How can individuals contribute to provide education to others at their level? There's so many answers for this. I'm just thinking of a good, oh, and I missed a question just before. Oh, I see. Sorry, I'm going to answer the questions in sequence, and I hope I don't. If I miss anyone, please tell me, and you can comment again, and I will answer you. How can I be part of such a lovely initiative? Well, I'll tell you what. We love to work with other people in the area. My husband is in New Delhi right now. I'm stuck in Africa during lockdown and so on, and finishing some things here, but I will be returning to India hopefully very soon. And we love to work with people. So what I will do is I will give you my contact data right here. I will give you a few email addresses just to be sure that you can reach me. There's one, and then we'll also add this one. There's a few email addresses in the comments, and my website, my charity website is, I'm going to send that here. That's the charity website. And for our educational activities within India, all right, this is our Clarity Learning Centers India. This is, at the moment, this is where we are providing the educational books that we're selling. This is a separate organization. And we also have claritylearningcenters.com, but I think that for what we're doing right now, this will work. So it's my contact data, and those are my websites, so that you can reach out to me, and you can absolutely email me, because to know how somebody would best collaborate with us, it sometimes helps to know who you are and what you do exactly. And, everybody's different. Sometimes people, have certain connections or resources or skills that they would like to use. And I can't know, because without knowing more about an individual person, what's the best way for them to contribute. There's always a way to contribute, and it usually varies depending on who you are and what you have to offer. So yes, you're welcome. So that's that. And then I'm just going through, make sure I didn't miss any questions. Okay, so persons ages 3 to 35 years, never enrolled, saying not interested, financial constraints in countries. Okay. I would say that, okay, actually, I'm going to give you a link here. Come to think of it. This is, this was written some weeks ago. This is a document about our slum education project. And it's actually going to be updated soon, because we've added certain elements such as the Learning Small Word series. But this will still give you an overview of the project. And what we are finding is that when we approach education properly with the basics, and we make it entertaining and engaging for the children, and we make sure that they really understand, they do actually want to learn. They really do. When people say that they can't learn, it's usually that they are in apathy about it. They've given up. Maybe they don't feel that they can because they need money, but they also don't really have much hope that they could actually study and learn and become more intelligent and then have a better future or a better life. And I also have some success stories. Oh, you know what? I'm going to give you also our Facebook page, because if you go there, there are some successes of the tutors that we've been training. And you can please follow us on Facebook. I actually keep Facebook updated more than anything else. Sometimes I'm a little slow on making sure that the website is fully updated, but the Facebook page is much more frequently updated. We all get really busy. It's how charities go, not just me, but everybody. But if you go to our Facebook page, you will find, and this is an example of an answer to that last question. I will bring up two examples here. Some of the successes from the tutors that we have trained in the slums. I mean, these here, there's one. These are people that were already there in the slums and that were already, working to educate children, but we have been training them and giving them tools to make this much more successful and to make it accessible and easy and to engage the children and to ensure that the basics are filled in. So I just sent you a couple of links. But for example, Vipin, he says, when I started this program, I did not believe that I would be able to learn to speak English, but now I'm realizing that I will be able to learn English very well. Before this, I was afraid to speak English. I wasn't able to speak even basic, simple words. I didn't dare speak English in front of anyone. I was embarrassed and I thought that people would just laugh at me. So I didn't try to speak English. But after just a few days on the program, I realized that I can learn to speak English, that I will become fluent, and that I can learn to speak like a gentleman. Through the methods used on this program, I have found confidence in speaking. And even though I still make mistakes, this no longer bothers me. I know that to learn English, I need to practice and not worry about mistakes. I've learned how to communicate with others. I'm no longer afraid to speak English. I no longer hesitate. Obviously, this isn't written in English. It was written in Hindi and translated. But when you give people, and you can read the entire testimonial success there on Facebook if you like, but when you give people a real hope and a real successful program, you will find, I think, that all of a sudden they are interested and they no longer have financial problems that are preventing them from getting an education. And then there's also from Poonam. In our slum, the children want to study and they have lots of drive, but they don't study. This is because there are no schools nearby, no opportunities to study. They do not have any opportunity. But over the last month, conditions in our area have improved. And then she's talking about our project there. She says, there's a new look on their faces. You can see the children walk around and shine. The students are very excited about the daily classes. They always arrive before the teacher. Because of the methods used to teach, the students are eager to learn. They lose their sense of time. They will stay as long as we give a class. We could teach them all day without losing their interest. Now the students are very interested and come to class every day. And she says more. But these are a couple of examples of how, like, providing a program that actually really works and engages the students will get that interest. And I haven't gone over everything, but we teach them more than just English. We teach them logic and we teach them communication skills and we teach them many things, and we will be adding. But we're giving them life skills at the same time while we teach English. So then they are actually able to use this in all aspects of their life, and they get very excited about this. All right, I'm checking if I missed any questions. What is the role of a teacher in 21st century digital area? I think it's the same as the teacher's role has always been, which is to ensure that students are educated to the point where they can really apply and use what they learned and do what they have been taught to do, not just receiving a diploma. Did I miss any questions? If I missed any comments, could you please type it again or write it now so I make sure I didn't miss anybody? Because I intended to answer all of the questions here as possible. So, or if there are any new questions now, I think it's probably time for questions, right? Or did I talk too much? What are the problems you face when you first organized the Foundation for Helping Children Who Wants to Be Educated? Let me think for a second. Problems. just having enough time to do everything. But that's me. There's always something else to do and just trying to get it all done. I know that's probably not the answer you were looking for, but it's my honest answer. I find myself that there's always more people to help and there's always more to do. But that's not what everyone else's answer will be. Other people would have different answers to the question, but that's my answer. You're welcome. All right. I don't know if we're out of time now or if there are more questions, but yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Education is the key to the door of freedom. And as you rightly pointed out, that it is the primary building block of a child. Thank you so much, ma'am, for contributing such a great cause and help these little growing flowers who are the future of the nation and giving them the opportunity to live their dreams so that they can feel free and enjoy the freedom of right to education. CVF Pro Bono Foundation is very fortunate to have you and witness what you have to convey to our participants. It is really very insightful, ma'am. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much for having me.
Yes, guys, you can leave now. Thank you so much.
Who is it?